so I think
Yeah.
there's going to be a lot of folks there. But yep,
Yeah,
crossing my fingers.
He's told me a story the other day about a time when he was like his like room was absolutely mobbed with fans and he couldn't even like get out of the event like facility to his hotel room because there was just a mob of fans in the way. And he like tried to sneak out a window, but it didn't work or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So
No, he's huge there. So
yeah.
be cool. But all right, that's going to be it for, I guess, just this tournament news. I think we spent a lot more time than we ever spend on this. So why don't we kind of segment into just your topics, Noah? And they all
Sure.
kind of revolve around casting, obviously. And the recent news that we saw on Reddit is when you announced that you were going to be coming back from Korea. Just your stint in Korea and casting for just all the big organizations like GSL and was it OGN and OSL, and now you're coming.
Yeah.
And now you're coming back. So obviously the very first question is, I guess what happened? Because I think a lot of folks think that I guess casting in Korea is kind of like the pinnacle of casting. I think you kind of work your way to that point, and Artosis and obviously Artosis obviously being like probably the top of the pyramid or whatever. But yeah, talk to us about that. Is that kind of a misconception that casting in Korea should be considered the pinnacle of casting?
Well, no, I don't think so. Actually, I think it's pretty accurate, and the reason being because, at least for now, like the best players are in Korea. I mean, go look at the top 20 of any tournament, and 17 of them are going to be Korean. Koreans have been taking top 8 of almost every MLG and such recently. So I mean, it's just the fact of the matter, the best players are here. And I actually, the first season that I did of Code A was kind of a trial season, and they asked me to come back. And at that same time, I actually had an offer from another organization to do some casting. And that's partly what it came down to for me was, do I want to go to this other place, or do I want to cast the best players in the world? Even Code A was a higher level of competition than casting a major tournament in other parts of the world. It was just,
Do you think that makes it more difficult for you when you're casting? Do you feel a little bit more nervous, making sure that you're getting everything correct?
That's definitely something that when I first got to Korea, that was something that was in my mind. I was thinking, wow, like I really need to do the best I can on this because this is a big deal. I wouldn't say it made me more nervous necessarily. But no, I mean, I don't think I would have taken it less seriously if I'd done another tournament, but it actually in a way made it easier because, I mean, when you do have the highest level of competition, it's going to make for better games anyway, so that makes my job easier if I'm casting better games, basically. Mm-hmm. So that's what the choice came down to for me a lot was, okay, well, this is where the best players are. I want to be able to cast the best players, so I definitely think that, that might not necessarily stay the case forever, but at least for now and for the foreseeable future, Korea is where the highest competition is, just by virtue of the fact that that's where all the best players are coming from. And now you're of course getting, the Koreans going around the world, and so you're getting the highest level competition in other tournaments as well. But it's so much more concentrated here that this is kind of the place to be for it.
I mean, as a caster, I definitely agree that the best players are there, but I feel like it might be harder to, a lot to do with the presentation, and being a caster is really storylines, right? Not just obviously doing play-by-play and really going through the games, but everything before and after, right, all have to do with storylines. Is it harder for you to get storylines for these Korean players versus, somebody like Stefano?
No, actually, you're exactly right. I mean, that's a major part of a caster's job is to present those storylines to the audience. Mm-hmm. You're talking about the game during the game, but for a good portion of your broadcast, you're not in a game, and that's the part where you're trying to convey to the audience why it's important, why this upcoming game or the recent game matter. So storylines are definitely a big deal. For me, it was not necessarily harder because I followed the Korean StarCraft scene for 4 years before I came here, in the Brood War scene. And so a lot of the players that were switching over, I already knew. Some of the, a lot of the players that were getting into Code A, those first seasons, if you go back and the first season of Code A, I was researching everyone that I was going to be casting, and I 9/10 of the players, I looked up and I was like, oh, this guy used to be a B teamer for this pro StarCraft team. Oh, this guy was amateur Brood War player that never made it pro. Oh, this guy was an A teamer that played in Pro League once or twice. And so I kind of, the stories were already there as a result. And I was personally, because that's what I was interested in anyways, I was able to kind of tie those stories in. You're all right though that it is more difficult because that doesn't necessarily matter as much to someone who hasn't been following the Korean scene for a while. Someone
Right.
who is, a new player to StarCraft 2 and says, oh, hey, look, I just picked up this new game. It's the big hip game right now, and it's being played in tournaments. That's cool. There's some guy from Korea. Okay, well, whatever. If you're not steeped in the scene, it's not going to be as necessarily as important to you. So that makes it harder. And the other thing that makes it harder is just that, I couldn't necessarily always just go up to the players and say, like, hey man, like, are you prepared for the match? Like, how do you feel today? I couldn't do that as much for the Korean players. A few of them knew a tiny bit of English, and a couple of the coaches knew English, and I could interface, but 3/4 of the time, that just wasn't really an option for me. And I tried sometimes, but it just didn't always.
Well, you said something. You said something about the fact that one, you did research. That's, amazing. I wonder how many other casters actually do research. We could get into that another time. But the one thing that you said for you was that you weren't creating any sort of a fabricated storyline. You had mentioned that you went over, okay, so if two guys are playing and they speak Korean and you can't really get in contact with them to get some sort of personal story from them, you were able to create the storyline about the event or about the match or about the tournament. You mentioned, why does this match matter? What's its record versus this person? If he wins this, what happens? I would really love to see a lot more of that in a lot of these big tournaments. I watch MLG tournaments sometime, and unless you're on Team Liquid, because you can't use the MLG website, you don't get a lot. You can't. I'm not gonna lie. It's garbage, dude. But if you can't follow the event real well because there just doesn't seem to be fed a lot of information about, okay, why does this match matter? What happens if he wins? Who does he play? It baffles me sometimes that either the organizers are not doing a good enough job at getting that information to the casters, or the casters don't care to share it.
Well, go ahead. Go ahead, Noah.
That's something that's kind of been something I've thought about a lot, and something I've kind of worked on personally in my casting is, a lot of this, what we see of the StarCraft community, their response to things, are the hardcore fans. And, so people cast to the hardcore fans for the most part, and that's in that assumption of knowledge about the tournaments and things, and also just in, casting the level of play that they're, the terminology even that they're using, that kind of thing. And it's something that, at a certain point, it's a decision that you have to make consciously, and some people make it either way. Okay, do I want to just focus on the base that I have now, or do I want to make it broader and possibly even alienate a little bit of that base to make it more appealing to a broader audience?
Yeah, but even with that being said, I watch the NFL every Sunday. And all of the casters go over, what's the implications of this game? What happens if they lose? They talk about their record. They're 1-7, so that I don't have to be checking ESPN for all of the stats. They share those. They share those things with us. So I'm not sure that it really matters whether or not. And I'm a hardcore NFL fan. I'm not sure that it really matters so much. But I understand what you're saying. But I think that that's something that should be done, even if every single person watching the event already knew everything they could about the tournament. Those are important things because they do create an instant storyline right there. Like, if he wins this game, he takes it to a third game. Just saying something simple like that catches a viewer back up to the situation. Maybe they stepped away, and you're just explaining the tournament. You're explaining the format, the event, what's happening.
Well, you're building the drama like just for that immediate game
Exactly.
too, right? I mean, so that, like you said, let the viewers know exactly what the consequences of losing this or winning this are, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So
And that's...
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's right. You finish with that.
I was done. I was going to actually bring up another segment, but if you had some
Okay.
more, go ahead.
Well, just real quick, that's kind of my point, I guess, is that you really want to do that, because if you look at mainstream sports, that's what they do, is they kind of give it a broad appeal and they explain everything. They make it very accessible. And so that's kind of been a goal of mine as a caster, at least a partial goal, to try and make it accessible. I mean, that's the reason why I got started in casting in the first place, was because I was like, wow, Korean esports is great. No one knows about it.
Right.
I'm going to make it accessible to people. So that kind of thing. So yeah, it's definitely something. And I mean, there's a lot of people that do that. There are definitely a lot of casters that put that in and that explain it. And what I think is really great is that a lot of the tournaments are now catching on to this. Kind of some of us have been telling these people, okay, well, yeah, that's the storylines. These are the things that are really going to matter. And people are catching on and be like, oh, okay. And now you're seeing these graphics. And, like GSL has statistics that they pop up now that say, oh, this person always wins on this map. And that kind of little stuff is going to help add to it. And so to see that support that the tournaments are now providing to make those storylines more prominent is a good thing as well. Because in the end, that is half the reason why people watch these games, not just because they enjoy the games, but because they enjoy the drama and, rooting for their teams and their players and the storylines more than the games themselves necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, exactly that. I mean, sometimes the quality of the game doesn't really speak as much as just the situation, right? A win in a situation sometimes, no matter how the win was, is sometimes overrides.
Right. I mean, people would rather talk about this right here. Hold on.
Yeah, it's okay. All right.
They'd rather talk about that than the game.
MoleTrap probably doesn't even know what you're talking about.
I know, that's okay.
Exactly. But
sorry,
there was a reference this weekend to ants causing some of the issues on stage, I guess.
Okay.
But so no, you did mention that it's kind of difficult for you because you don't speak the language. You don't speak Korean, right? And being able to get some of this information is difficult. And I've definitely heard from other folks that said that a lot of the big Korean organizations, they don't care about foreigners watching the tournament. Is that true in your eyes, or?
I wouldn't say that they don't care, and it's kind of different. I had the ability to work at both GOM and OSL, and it's
Yep, you're the perfect person to probably ask then.
Yeah, I mean,
both.
The way I would put it, so I think kind of maybe the one that would be more along that would be OGN, but I wouldn't say that they don't care as much as they just don't understand it as much because they're new at it. And I mean, the thing is even if they get a decent amount of stream viewers, they're getting probably 10 times more viewers on their cable television show because they are a cable television network. That's what they are. They're not an online company. They're a cable TV company. So that's their primary focus, is focusing on their TV fans. So in that sense, the foreign audience, I say foreign, that's kind of how people in Korea refer to people not in Korea, but
you got it. The
the non-Korean audience isn't as important just from a simple revenue standpoint. They get sponsors who pay for their ads on their TV shows, and that's where they're making their money. So from that standpoint, it's not as important. On the other hand, GOM TV, I think at first was more like that. I don't know, I wasn't around here obviously for the beginning of the GSL, but I think it was more like that at first because they are, I mean, GOM TV, they're not an esports organization. They're an online broadcasting organization. GSL was a product almost made entirely to promote their platform, which is the GOM player. The GOM player is actually,
right.
It's like VLC in Korea. People use it to watch whatever they want to watch all the time. And so that's their product. And GOM TV, GSL is kind of like just a subsidiary of that. So they have a completely different viewpoint on it where they're just saying, okay, well, if we can get more people watching and using our player, then, you know, that's a good thing. And now because they don't have that cable television audience that follows them, their audience is actually larger outside of Korea. So they've actually moved to placing even more of a, from what I understand at least, I don't have access to the numbers, I never did or anything, but it seems like they have more of an emphasis on the global broadcast, and they're,
right.
you know, obviously they've been making a lot more shows in the last year and that kind of thing to cater to the foreign audience.
Okay, right. So, you know, I know you and I have talked a little bit about just some of the challenges you've had since being there. You know, because like you said that like a company like OGN is more focused on TV, and you know the priority really isn't for, you know, online, just the online kind of broadcasts. You know, for you, you know, it's been harder for. I mean, it's been harder for you to get a lot of stuff accomplished. Not to mention the language barrier, right? So, talk to me about those challenges, and talk to me about some of those frustrations.
Well, let's see. Well, and then I mean, it's funny because I mentioned that in my when I announced that I was leaving Korea. I mentioned that it's hard because I don't speak Korean. People are like, well, why didn't you learn the language? And well, I did learn some of the language, but you know, if you learn enough to get around and to communicate on a basic level, it's not going to enable you to have a discussion with a coach about interviewing his players or about this, that, or the other thing. So I do know some Korean. I probably could have put more time into studying Korean, actually. I kind of wish I had, but even if I had, I wouldn't necessarily be at a high enough level to get what I needed done. So that's definitely been frustrating, just, you know, it's really frustrating to have that access where I can walk up to a player and talk to him, but not really be able to get much out of it, you know, necessarily. But I mean, it's also just, yeah, people have been, you know, flaky in the past about, you know, for instance, you know, something I mentioned to you before was, you know, trying to get replays from people. And I'd talk to them and I'd be like, you know, there's one guy, and actually I guess he's an easy target, so I'll mention him sort of, not by name, but, you know, the guy who Slayers was mad at, right?
Okay.
Mr. J or whatever. He's someone that I knew, actually, and you know, I'm not surprised that they ended up trusting him because he seemed like a really cool guy, and I don't know what the whole story is behind that. But you know, he was doing PR stuff for Slayers, and so I was like, I talked to Jessica. I said, hey, can I get some replays from the Slayers team? People want to see more content of these younger players who aren't in the GSL. I want to put some VODs up, and she said, sure, talk to this guy. And I did, and he said, oh, yeah, I'll email you. And I talked to him again. I said, hey, you know, I never got the email back. Oh, yeah, I'll email you. Yeah, okay. And I talked to him again, and
it never happens.
Let's Skype. Okay, I'll add you on Skype, and added him on Skype. I talked to him on Skype a couple times, and it just never happened. And stuff like that happened with you know, a couple different coaches as well, where, you know, they spoke a little bit of English, and I was like, hey, you know, people want to see more of your team.
Do you think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that they just don't see that stuff as important? I mean, that's been one of the complaints about the teams over there, is that they don't see the marketing of what they're doing as important.
Yeah, I think that's part of it, just because that's kind of the, you know, it hasn't necessarily been that important historically. I mean, sports has been around in Korea professionally for 13, 14 years now or something like that. And that's not how people did it in the past. You know, they're used to living off dirt and cramming themselves into a house together and just scraping by until they win a major tournament, basically, and make it big on a big team. So they don't really necessarily have experience seeing how the small-scale promotion can lead to things. But part of it is also, I think it just might be a Korean business culture thing, because this is something that I've actually heard. This is, again, I've had my own frustrations, but this is something I've heard from friends of friends, people that have worked for other Korean organizations that aren't esports organizations, that sometimes things just don't get done. A friend of a friend that works in China, he's a businessman in China actually, and he's had to work with Korean businesses. When I first came to Korea, the advice that he gave to me was, well, what I know about Korean organizations, Korean businesses, is that you have to ask 10 times to get anything done. And that's been my experience. I think it's just a cultural thing, and I'm not trying to be.
So
I think unless you have beer,
cultural thing.
Unless you go and have beer with them and dinner with them, and you really like have this like strong, deep personal bond, it's almost like everything's personal in Korea. There is no like separation between business and you have to really like grow a bond with people before you get a lot of like that kind of cooperation. I think and when there's something wrong, they don't tell you what it is. They'll tell you that there's something else wrong, and it's I think it's more of an Asian actual business culture thing, because from the experience that I've had, a lot of folks that we've worked with, like professional translators and professional emissaries in the Korean peninsula, they describe these types of things to us as, was very counter Western business culture, but as being the case in Thailand as well, and in China. So I mean, to a certain degree, I think it's just the varying ways of doing business in the world. But for a foreigner, it's totally foreign. I mean, you really don't understand it, because you're like, well, in America, we have a problem with somebody. We just go up and we tell them this is our problem, and what are we going to do about it? It's like, well, you can't really do that in Korea, because you'll offend people, and then they won't want to work with you at all. And
so you're exactly right. It's just the way things are done. Like, that's what I was trying to get across. Is like, I'm not trying to be insulting or like picking on anyone. It's just the way things are done here, and and that's something that you don't know how to deal with as a Westerner coming here, and that's something that's frustrating in and of itself. Is that you're like, well, there's this whole thing that's going on, and at first, it took me a while to even realize that was just kind of how things worked. For a while, I was just like, wow, like, I don't know what's going on. These people are just being difficult, and I have to ask 10 times for everything. It's ridiculous. But and you're exactly right, by the way, that like, to get anything done, really, you need to go out drinking with the person that's going to do it for you.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really, really important to drink with people that you want to work with. Like, that's
and I've realized that in Korea, drinking is not viewed like it is here in the United States, like some kind of recreational activity. In Korea, like drinking and dining together and learning about each other as people is like totally infused and embedded into the business culture.
Yeah, but that's the same here, Mark. I mean, shoot, when I was working in the corporate world, I suppose, we were told when we take a client out, you should have 2 drinks, take them golfing, take them out for dinner. A lot of business happens on the golf course. A huge amount of business does.
Definitely. So
it happens over soju.
Yeah, exactly. Soju's like every meal, man.
I think it goes to a lower level in Korea because, when on GameNet had a finals, after the finals, everyone in the company went out. They rented out an entire restaurant, and the boss paid for everyone to have barbecue and soju and beer for the whole night, that kind of thing. And it was, to the point where I went to a bar with a friend of mine, and at a certain point they actually shut down the bar early because that was their night of the month, that all the waitresses and the bar manager went out to eat together. They shut down the bar at, it was at 4, which was early for bars in Korea, so they could all go out to eat together, as a group, the business.
Gestures are important. Gestures are very important, and the gesture isn't just what I'm doing for you, but what I might be giving up in order to do this for you. Like, it's statements of commitment and affection in a way that seems, I wouldn't say it seems counterbalanced, but it seems like, to a foreigner, to a Western culture, like Western business culture, these things either seem unnecessary or they seem overdoing it. But in my experience working with like our Korean partner team, StarTale, and others like I am and folks like that, and working with people who like Nicholas and Wani who have been very, very experienced in this. It's definitely
Right.
it's definitely something that you have to learn. And it's the first time, a few times you're like, but they're saying this, and they're like, no, that's not the problem. That is not the problem. That's made up. The real problem is actually this. I'm like, why don't they tell us that? Well,
just make something up.
they're like, well, because they're not going to
Sounds
tell
like
you.
you're talking to a woman.
Oh,
Sorry.
goodness.
You're talking to someone who's from a culture where it is completely not allowed to cause conflict. So instead of they will not cause conflict at all costs. At all costs.
Jessica, that man.
So they won't cause personal conflict.
There's a difference between drama and conflict.
There's a difference between
Okay.
drama and conflict. I mean, just on a side note, I do consider Jessica a friend, and I think a lot of the stuff that's happened recently that's been pinned on her is not entirely her fault. So, just as a side thing.
You know why that is? Because at the end of the day, when it comes to Quantic, everything is my fault. That's why.
I could have told you that.
So when it comes to Slayers, everything is Jessica's fault.
Yeah, that's well.
Unfortunately.
Well, she's a very public figure too, so it's
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, like, it's impossible to escape the fallout of a business ownership, responsibility. I mean, it's just impossible. Like, people love you, hate you, whatever. I mean, same thing with Andrew and CSN. Everything's Andrew's fault. I mean, at the end of the day, even if it's John's fault, it's still Andrew's fault. Like,
It's never my fault, but yeah.
But all right, Noah. So want to segment into
Sure.
A lot of people talk about players being in Korea, right? I mean, I think a lot of us have a pretty good feel for what a player's life is, because I've had other players on here. Obviously, Mark has some a few players over there too, and a lot of them have talked about being over there and just practicing a lot, being a little isolated, that sort of thing. But talk to me about being a caster, in Korea and being alone. Because, for the most part, I've had Doa on here, and, he loves Korea. So he has, nothing but great things to say about Korea. And obviously, Dan and Nick are having, have their life in Korea, too. But, you're coming back. So talk to me about what your life was like in Korea.
Let's see. Yeah, I mean... Yeah, that's something that's definitely been something I've been thinking about. Is it's easy to. That's what I mentioned to you. Is it's easy for a lot of players to kind of feel isolated here. I think they definitely had it a little bit worse in a way. The players, especially because if you're coming here and you're living in a pro house, a pro team house, you're surrounded by Koreans all the time, and it's your job to talk with them. And you can't a lot of the time. And from what I understand, the foreign players are kind of treated as outsiders, and they're not necessarily as respected. And that doesn't have to be the case every time, but I've heard few different occasions where that's the case, where they're kind of like
definitely the case.
They're not part of
it.
the.
It's really hard to find yourself. We're very fortunate to find ourselves in a place where that's not the case as much, but I mean, it's definitely the case in a lot of places.
Yeah. To the point where, sometimes they'll even consider other Koreans on another team more valued.
More
allies than the foreigners. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's led to some bad stuff happening as a result. So I haven't had to deal with that. So I want to point out that there's even more challenges for them. For me, though, I have felt a little bit isolated here. It's definitely been a problem. It's definitely been one of the reasons why I've been thinking about heading back to the States for a while. And that's, I gotta admit that's partly my own fault that I haven't really gone on my way to develop a community here as much. And so that's something that I think that I'm really happy Nick and Dan have been able to do, even though they even had even more challenges than I did. When I got here, I had a GOM house to go to. I had people that were casting here that could help me integrate and stuff. Nick and Dan, when they came here, they had no one necessarily.
And
what do you think, though? What do you think that, from a perspective of just being completely, remove yourself from yourself and look at it from an external perspective? What do you think about the state of affairs regarding the stock of MoleTrap? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Where do you see yourself right now? You see yourself at the peak of your career, community casting wise? Do you see yourself, in a low point? Do you see yourself And what do you think you need to do to try to increase that stock value again, and really, I think some of the